bullet that should have killed me passed so close to my ear, I heard my own death whistle by in the darkness. They found Sheriff Dalton 3 days later, hanging upside down from the old cottonwood, his eyes carved clean out of his skull, but his star still pinned to his chest like some sick joke. My name is Samuel Cross, and I'm the only man who walked out of Redemption Valley after the Silent Hunter came through in the winter of 1887. What stalked us through those frozen nights weren't no outlaw gang, and it sure as hell weren't no animal that any trapper could name. I'm putting this story down because the law won't listen, the church won't believe, and every man who rode with me into those mountains is feeding the worms now except for me. Before I tell you how 17 good men died screaming in the snow, I need you to understand something. This ain't no campfire tale to spook children. This happened. The scars on my back are real. The empty graves in Redemption are real. And somewhere out there in the Bitterroot Range, that thing is still hunting. If this story puts ice in your veins, hit that subscribe button, because you're gonna want to hear every word I got to say. Smash that like if you believe some things in this world can't be explained by scripture or science. And drop a comment telling me what country and city you're watching from, because I need to know this warning is spreading far beyond these cursed mountains. Now settle in, pour yourself something strong, and whatever you do, don't listen to this alone after dark. The storm hit Redemption on a Tuesday, which should have told us right there that God had turned his face away from our little settlement. I was dealing cards at the Silver Spur when the stranger pushed through the doors, bringing with him a gust of wind so cold it snuffed out half the lamps in the saloon. He didn't look like much at first. Average height, wearing a long duster coat black as a preacher's Bible, face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat that dripped melting snow onto our floorboards. But when he lifted that hat, every man at my table went quiet, and Big Frank Morrison actually knocked over his whiskey glass, which I'd never seen him do in 15 years of gambling. The stranger's eyes were wrong, pale as frozen pond water, and they didn't blink. Not once in the entire time he stood there scanning the room like he was counting cattle at auction. "I'm looking for a guide," he said, his voice flat and hollow as wind through a skull. "Someone who knows the Bitterroot Range. Someone who ain't afraid of the high country in winter." Old Tom Riggins laughed from the corner, drunk as usual. "Mister, you'd have to be touched in the head, or desperate as a dying man to go up into those mountains this time of year. Even the Shoshone won't set foot up there once the snow comes." The stranger turned those dead eyes on Tom, and the old drunk's laughter died in his throat like a candle flame pinched between wet fingers. "I'm offering $500 in gold," the stranger continued, pulling out a leather pouch that clinked heavy with coin. "Half now, half when we return. I need 6 men. Hard men who can shoot straight and keep their mouths shut." I should have known better. Hell, every one of us should have known better. But $500 was more money than most of us would see in 5 years of honest work. And honest work was something none of us were particularly good at anyway. We rode out at dawn with frost still clinging to our beards. 7 men total, counting the stranger who never did give us his name. Besides me, there was Big Frank Morrison, who could split a man's skull with his bare hands, and had done so twice in bar fights. Johnny Red Cloud, a half-breed tracker who could follow a ghost across solid rock. The Garrett twins, mean as rattlesnakes and twice as quick with their pistols. And Marcus Webb, an ex-cavalry scout who'd survived 3 years fighting Apaches in Arizona. We were hard men, like the stranger wanted, each of us running from something, the law, our pasts, or just the boredom of living too long without dying. The stranger led us north into the high country, following trails that weren't on any map I'd ever seen, paths that wound between cliff faces so narrow our horses had to walk sideways, their eyes rolling white with fear. By the 3rd day, the temperature had dropped so low that our breath froze in our mustaches, and Johnny Red Cloud started getting nervous, pointing out signs that made his copper skin go pale. "No animal tracks," he muttered, crouching beside what should have been a game trail. "No birds, no scat. Nothing's living up here, Cross. This whole mountain is dead." That night, we made camp in a canyon that felt like the inside of a tomb, the wind howling through the rocks with a sound that was almost like screaming if you listened close enough. Marcus Webb was on first watch when we heard it, a whistle, low and mournful, coming from somewhere up in the darkness above our camp. The stranger sat up immediately, those pale eyes reflecting our campfire like a wolf's, and for the first time since we'd met him, something like emotion crossed his face. Satisfaction. "It knows we're here," he whispered, and smiled with too many teeth showing. "Good. That means we're close." Marcus Webb disappeared sometime between midnight and dawn, vanished from his watch post without making a sound, without firing his rifle, without even screaming. We found his boot still sitting by the fire, laces tied tight, as if he'd been plucked straight up out of them like a flower pulled from soil. Big Frank wanted to turn back right then, his massive hands shaking as he held Marcus's empty boots. But the stranger just smiled that terrible smile and reminded us we hadn't earned our gold yet. Johnny Red Cloud found the trail, if you could call it that, leading up the canyon wall, a series of gouges in the rock face that no human hands could have made, each mark deep enough to sink your fingers into solid stone. "Whatever took him climbed straight up a sheer cliff," Johnny said, his voice barely above a whisper, carrying a full-grown man, in the dark. We found Marcus 3 hours later, wedged into a crevice about 60 feet up, and what we saw made the Garrett twins vomit into the snow. He'd been opened from throat to groin with surgical precision, his insides arranged in patterns around his body like some kind of heathen ritual. But his face wore an expression of absolute terror, eyes frozen wide, mouth locked open in a scream that never found air. The stranger climbed up to examine the body with an eagerness that turned my stomach, running his fingers along the cuts, nodding to himself like a professor studying an interesting specimen. "Beautiful work," he murmured, loud enough for us to hear. "Clean, efficient, no wasted motion. This is definitely what I've been searching for." That's when I realized the truth that should have been obvious from the start. We weren't the hunters on this expedition, and the stranger wasn't paying us to guide him towards something. He was using us as bait to draw it out. We should have shot the stranger right there and rode hard for redemption. But fear does strange things to men's judgment, and somehow turning our backs on those mountains felt more dangerous than pushing forward. The Garrett twins tried to leave anyway, waiting until the stranger was relieving himself in the trees, then mounting up quiet and spurring their horses back down the trail we'd climbed. They made it maybe 200 yards before we heard the horses screaming. Not the frightened whinnying of spooked animals, but genuine screams of agony that no horse should be able to make. We found the animals torn apart, literally ripped in half, their blood painting the snow in wide arterial sprays. But the Garrett twins were gone, dragged off in opposite directions judging by the trails. Big Frank grabbed the stranger by his coat and slammed him against a pine tree hard enough to shake snow from the branches. "What the hell did you bring us up here to find? What is this thing?" The stranger didn't fight back, just looked at Frank with those frozen eyes and spoke in that dead voice. The Shoshone call it the Silent Hunter. The trappers who survived encountering it call it the Pale Walker. I call it evolution's mistake, something that should have died out 10,000 years ago but didn't, something that learned to hide in the high places where men don't go. Johnny Red Cloud was shaking his head, backing away from both of them. "My grandfather told stories, said his grandfather saw one take an entire hunting party in a single night. Said it moves like smoke, kills like lightning, and you never hear it coming until your blood is already cooling in the snow." That's when we heard the whistling again, closer now, coming from 3 different directions at once, a sound like wind through bone that made my teeth ache and my trigger finger twitch. The stranger pulled free from Frank's grip and drew a strange knife from his belt, the blade black as midnight and carved with symbols I didn't recognize. "Gentlemen, I suggest we make our stand here. Running only makes the hunt more enjoyable for it." The sun was setting behind the peaks, turning the snow blood red, and somewhere in the gathering darkness, the Silent Hunter was circling closer, and I could feel its attention on us like cold fingers walking up my spine. We built 3 fires in a triangle formation, keeping our backs to a massive boulder that protected us from behind, our rifles loaded and our nerves stretched tight as piano wire. Big Frank saw it first, just after midnight, a shape moving between the trees, tall and wrong, its proportions not quite human, arms too long, legs bending at angles that made your eyes hurt to follow. He fired twice, both shots true, and we heard the bullets hit flesh with that wet thump you never forget. But the thing didn't fall, didn't even slow down, just melted back into the shadows like it was made of smoke and malice. Johnny Red Cloud was muttering prayers in Shoshone, his rifle shaking in his hands, when something dropped from the trees above us and landed in the center of our camp. The head of one of the Garrett twins, eyes still open, face frozen in that same expression of ultimate terror we'd seen on Marcus. The stranger laughed, actually laughed, and moved toward the darkness with that black knife gleaming in the firelight. "Come on then, show yourself. I've crossed 3 territories and killed 6 men to find you." That's when everything went to hell. The thing came from everywhere at once, a blur of pale flesh and impossible speed. And Big Frank's head separated from his shoulders so fast his body stood there pumping blood for 3 full seconds. Before it understood it was dead, Johnny fired until his rifle clicked empty, then drew his revolver and put 2 rounds into his own head before the thing could reach him, choosing his own death over what he knew was coming. I ran like a coward, crashed through the forest blind with terror, branches tearing my face, the whistling sound following me like a promise of death, getting closer with every heartbeat. The stranger's screaming started just before dawn, lasting for 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours, his voice rising and falling in pitches of agony I didn't know a human throat could produce. Until finally, mercifully, it cut off mid-shriek. I found a cave as the sun broke over the mountains, wedged myself into a crack so narrow I could barely breathe, and stayed there for 2 full days while something circled outside, whistling that bone-chilling song, waiting for me to emerge, waiting for me to give up and accept my death like all the others had. I made it back to redemption on the 8th day, half frozen, half starved, and completely out of my mind with what I'd seen in those mountains. The townspeople found me collapsed in the street, raving about the silent hunter, about pale flesh and impossible speed, about men torn apart like paper dolls in the hands of an angry child. Doc Mitchell said I had frostbite and fever, that I was delirious, that the high altitude had damaged my brain. Sheriff Dalton organized a search party to find the others. And that's when they discovered I wasn't lying. They found Big Frank's body, found what was left of Marcus Webb, found pieces of the Garrett twins scattered across 2 miles of frozen hell. But they never found the stranger, and they never found Johnny Red Cloud, though I know damn well he put those bullets in his own skull because he understood what I'm telling you now. 3 weeks after I came down from that mountain, Sheriff Dalton went missing from his own office in the middle of the night. Doors locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry. Just gone like smoke. They found him strung up in that cottonwood tree with his eyes carved out, and carved into his chest in letters an inch deep were symbols that matched the ones on the stranger's black knife. The thing had followed me home. The silent hunter had come down from its mountain, and it was teaching me a lesson about survival. That sometimes living is the cruelest punishment of all, that being the only witness means carrying the weight of all those deaths on your shoulders until that weight crushes you or drives you mad. So here's my warning to anyone hearing this story, anyone who thinks they're hard enough or brave enough or stupid enough to go looking for proof in the Bitterroot Range. Don't. Some things in this world are meant to stay hidden in the high places where civilization ends. Some things have been hunting since before we climbed down from the trees, and they remember how easy we are to kill. The silent hunter is still up there, still waiting, still whistling that bone-chilling song between the peaks. And if you hear that whistle in the darkness, if you see something moving between the trees with arms too long and legs that bend wrong, don't run. Running just makes the hunt last longer. Say your prayers, make your peace, and pray that it kills you quick. Because what it did to Sheriff Dalton, what it did to my friends, that's the mercy it shows to those who run. I survived that night in the mountains, but part of me died up there in the snow. And every time I close my eyes, I see those pale eyes watching me from the darkness, and I hear that whistle getting closer, 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 reminding me that the silent hunter never forgets, and one day, when I least expect it, it's going to come back to finish what it started. If this story left you looking over your shoulder, subscribe for more tales from the dark corners of the Wild West. Hit that like button if you believe some legends are built on truth. And tell me in the comments, what country and city are you watching from? And do you have any unexplained stories from your own region's history? Sleep well, if you can.